Bride of the Hollowfang. Eloan Graves never believed in her mother's stories about the first moon that once every century a child was born under its light, bound to something older than time. But when she returned to Briarwood after her mother's death, the truth bled through the cracks. The townsfolk avoided her gaze. Her family's name was carved into the stone archway leading to the woods. And on the night of the next full moon, she woke to the scent of pine and something metallic just as a shadow moved in the corner of her room. A man stood there, his golden eyes burning like embers. "It's you," he murmured, almost in awe. Then his expression hardened. "You need to run. Now." Chapter 1. The Return to Briarwood. The train rattled along the tracks, each clack a rhythmic countdown to a life Eloan Graves had deliberately left behind. 57 years old, with the faint lines around her eyes telling a story of laughter and loss in equal measure, she watched the familiar landscape blur past. Fields of emerald green, dotted with the occasional farmhouse, gave way to the denser, darker hues of the ancient woods that bordered Briarwood. Her mother, Clara, had called them the Whispering Woods, a place of secrets and shadows, of stories whispered only in the hush of twilight. Eloan had dismissed them as fanciful tales, the ramblings of a woman clinging to a past that should have been forgotten. Now, Clara was gone, and Eloan was returning to the very place she'd sworn never to see again. The taxi ride from the station was a silent journey through the heart of Briarwood. The town seemed frozen in time, its quaint, cobblestone streets lined with shops that looked exactly as they had when she was a girl. The bakery still displayed its wares in the window, the scent of warm bread momentarily distracting her from the knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. The library, with its towering oak doors and stained glass windows, stood sentinel, a silent guardian of the town's history, a history Eloan was now a part of, whether she wanted to be or not. As the taxi pulled up to the Graves estate, a sprawling, somewhat dilapidated Victorian mansion perched on a hill overlooking the town, a wave of memories washed over her. The scent of lavender and old wood, the creak of the porch swing, the echo of her mother's laughter, it was all there, a ghostly symphony of the past. The house itself seemed to sag under the weight of years, its paint peeling, the gardens overgrown, a mirror of the neglect it had suffered since Eloan had left. She paid the driver, the silence punctuated only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the cloying sweetness of honeysuckle. It was a beautiful night, a full moon hanging high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over everything. Eloan paused, looking up at it. The first moon, her mother had called it, a celestial event that occurred only once a century, bathing the world in its powerful, ancient light. Nonsense, Eloan had always thought. Yet, tonight, looking at its luminous surface, she felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The front door creaked open with a groan, the sound echoing through the empty house. Dust motes danced in the moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. The air inside was heavy, stagnant, filled with the ghosts of conversations and laughter long faded. Eloan walked through the familiar rooms, her fingers tracing the dusty surfaces of furniture draped in white sheets. The living room, with its grand fireplace and faded Persian rug, the dining room, where they had shared countless meals, the library, her mother's sanctuary, filled with shelves overflowing with ancient tomes and leather-bound journals. It was in the library that she found a small, wooden box tucked away on a high shelf. It was intricately carved, adorned with symbols she didn't recognize, but felt strangely familiar. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a silver ring. It was simple, yet elegant, a single, moonstone embedded in its center, shimmering with an inner light. As she slipped it onto her finger, a jolt of energy surged through her, leaving her breathless. The room seemed to spin, the shadows deepening, the silence broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. She stumbled back, pulling the ring off and dropping it back into the box, as if it had burned her. What was that? She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing pulse. It was just the stress, she told herself. The long journey, the memories, the overwhelming sense of loss. It was all getting to her. But as she turned to leave the library, she noticed something else. Carved into the stone archway leading to the Whispering Woods, barely visible in the dim light, was her family name, Graves. She ran her fingers over the cold, rough stone, a sense of unease settling over her. She had never noticed that before. Had it always been there? Or was it something new, something sinister? The townsfolk, she remembered from her brief foray into town, had been odd. They had avoided her gaze, their whispers ceasing abruptly as she approached. There was a fear in their eyes, a wariness that she couldn't explain. It was as if they knew something she didn't, a secret they were guarding with their lives. Back in her childhood bedroom, overlooking the moonlit gardens and the dark expanse of the woods, Aloan tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. The images of the day, the house, the ring, the townsfolk, the carving swirled in her mind, a confusing, unsettling jumble. She felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that she was not alone, that something was watching her. She got out of bed and walked to the window, drawn by an unseen force. The moon was directly overhead now, bathing the landscape in its silvery light. And then she saw it, a shadow, moving in the corner of her room. It was tall, broad-shouldered, and undeniably human. But there was something else, something primal, that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw him more clearly. He was standing perfectly still, his form silhouetted against the moonlight. His hair was dark, falling to his shoulders, and his face was partially obscured by shadow. But his eyes were what held her captive. They were golden, luminous, burning like embers in the darkness. He took a step forward, and the scent of pine needles and something metallic, something wild, filled the room. It was a scent she had never encountered before, yet it felt strangely familiar, stirring something deep within her. He spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "It's you," he murmured, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Aloan wanted to speak, to ask him who he was, what he was doing in her room, but the words caught in her throat. She could only stare at him, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. His expression changed then, hardening, the tenderness replaced by a fierce urgency. He took another step closer, his golden eyes boring into hers. "You need to run," he said, his voice low and urgent.
Now.
Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous, a stark contrast to the almost reverent tone he'd used moments before.
Run?
From what? From him? Aloan's mind, already reeling from the day's unsettling events, struggled to make sense of it all. She wanted to demand answers, to scream at him to leave, but her voice remained trapped in her throat. Fear, cold and paralyzing, had taken root. He seemed to sense her confusion, his intense gaze softening slightly, though the urgency remained etched on his features. "There isn't time to explain," he said, his voice a low growl, laced with a frustration that seemed directed more at himself than at her. "They'll be coming. They know you're here."
Who?
The word finally escaped, a shaky whisper barely audible above the frantic thudding of her heart. He hesitated, his eyes darting towards the window, as if expecting to see something or someone appear at any moment. "The hunters," he finally said, the words spoken with a mixture of dread and defiance. "They've been waiting for generations." Hunters? Generations? Aloan felt a dizzying sense of unreality, as if she had stepped into one of her mother's fantastical stories. But the man's palpable fear, the raw intensity in his eyes, convinced her that this was no fairy tale. This was real, and she was in danger. He took another step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the intoxicating scent of pine and that strange, metallic undertone that sent a shiver of both fear and something else down her spine. She instinctively recoiled, pressing herself against the cold glass of the window. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. He reached out a hand, as if to touch her, but stopped just short, his fingers curling into a fist. "I won't hurt you." I'm here to protect you. Protect her? From the hunters? The absurdity of it all threatened to overwhelm her. Yet, looking into his eyes, those mesmerizing golden eyes that seemed to hold both ancient wisdom and a deep, profound sadness, she found herself wanting to believe him.
Why?
She managed to ask, her voice still trembling. Why me? He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Because you're the daughter of the first moon, he said, the words echoing the title of her mother's most cherished story. It's your destiny. Destiny. Another word that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. Eloan had always scoffed at the notion of destiny, of a predetermined path laid out for her. She believed in free will, in the power of choice. Yet, here she was, facing a man who spoke of destiny as if it were an undeniable truth. My mother, she told me stories, Eloan said, her voice gaining a little strength. About the first moon, about a child born under its light. Your mother knew the truth. He interrupted, his gaze unwavering. She tried to protect you, to keep you hidden. But they found her, and now they've found you. A wave of grief washed over Eloan, the pain of her mother's recent death resurfacing with a sharp, agonizing intensity. They killed her? She whispered, the words a horrified accusation. He hesitated again, his jaw clenching, his golden eyes darkening with a barely contained rage. They took her, he finally said, his voice tight with emotion. But it was her time. The first moon wanes, and with it, the power it grants. His words were cryptic, confusing, but Eloan understood one thing. Her mother's death was connected to this supernatural world he represented. And now, she was caught in the middle of it. He seemed to read the fear and confusion in her eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control of his emotions. Look, he said, his voice more measured now. I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to trust me. I can get you to safety. We can figure this out together. Trust him? A stranger who had appeared in her room in the middle of the night, speaking of hunters and destiny and the first moon? It was insane. Yet, there was something in his voice, in his eyes, that resonated with a deep, primal part of her. A connection she couldn't explain, a feeling of recognition. She looked out the window, at the moonlit landscape, at the dark, looming shadows of the whispering woods. Her mother's stories, once dismissed as fantasy, now seemed to hold the key to her survival. The woods, she said, her voice barely a whisper. My mother, she said, they were a place of refuge, of power. He nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. They are, he confirmed, but they're also dangerous. We need to be careful. He reached out his hand again, this time not stopping. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her body. It was a touch that was both terrifying and strangely comforting, a spark of connection in the midst of chaos. Come with me, he said, his voice low and urgent. We have to go.
Now.
Eloan hesitated for only a moment. Her rational mind screamed at her to run, to call the police, to do anything but follow this strange, dangerous man into the unknown. But her instincts, her intuition, the part of her that had always felt a connection to something deeper, something older, told her to trust him. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, and placed her hand in his. His grip was strong, firm, reassuring. And as he led her towards the window, towards the darkness of the whispering woods, she knew that her life had changed forever. The whispers of the past had become a roar, and she was about to be swept away by the tide. The chilling hoot of an owl seemed a harbinger of things to come. Chapter 3. The Man in the Shadows. The night air was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of her bedroom. As they climbed out the window and onto the overgrown trellis, Eloan felt a sense of exhilaration mixed with her fear. It was reckless, dangerous, and utterly unlike anything she had ever done. Yet, with his hand firmly clasped in hers, she felt a strange sense of rightness. He moved with a grace and agility that belied his size, effortlessly navigating the tangled vines and crumbling stonework. He was like a creature of the night, perfectly at home in the shadows. Eloan, on the other hand, felt clumsy and awkward, her every movement a potential betrayal. Once they reached the ground, he didn't release her hand. He kept her close, his body a shield between her and the looming darkness of the woods. The scent of pine and that intriguing metallic tang intensified, wrapping around her like a protective cloak. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice a breathless whisper, the question finally breaking through the wall of fear that had held her captive. He paused, glancing back at her, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, as if weighing the consequences of revealing his identity. "Reese," he finally said, the name a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. Reese. It was a strong name, a name that suited him. It fit the aura of power and mystery that surrounded him. "Alone," she offered in return, feeling a strange sense of formality in the midst of their desperate flight. He nodded, a slight smile playing on his lips. "I know," he said, his voice softer now, less guarded. They entered the woods, the trees closing in around them, swallowing them in a world of shadows and whispers. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, creating an eerie, almost ethereal atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the ever-present aroma of pine. Reese moved with a confidence that suggested he knew these woods intimately. He navigated the winding paths, avoiding fallen branches and hidden roots with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. Eloan, however, stumbled frequently, her eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. "How do you know these woods so well?" she asked, her voice still hushed, partly out of fear of being overheard, partly out of a growing sense of awe. "I've lived here all my life," he said, his voice a low murmur, blending with the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs. "These woods are a part of me." His words hinted at a connection that went beyond mere familiarity, a bond that was both deep and profound. Eloan sensed a story there, a history that was intertwined with the secrets of Briarwood and the Whispering Woods. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds their own breathing and the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Eloan found herself studying Reese, trying to decipher the enigma that he was. He was tall, powerfully built, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular frame. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing a face that was both ruggedly handsome and strangely haunting. His features were sharp, almost angular, his jawline strong, his cheekbones high. But it was his eyes that captivated her, those mesmerizing golden eyes that seemed to hold both ancient wisdom and a deep, profound sadness. She noticed the way he moved, the way he held himself, the way he scanned their surroundings with a constant vigilance. He was a warrior, she realized, a protector. And she was the one he was protecting. "Who are these hunters?" she asked, breaking the silence, her voice stronger now, fueled by a growing need to understand the danger they were facing. "What do they want?" Reese hesitated, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "They're an ancient order," he finally said, his voice carefully measured. "Dedicated to eradicating our kind." "Our kind?" The word sent a chill down Eloan's spine. What did he mean by that? Was he different? Was that what her mother's stories had been hinting at? The thought was both terrifying and strangely exciting. "Eradicating?" she pressed, her voice trembling slightly. "Why?" He stopped walking, turning to face her, his golden eyes searching hers. "Because they fear us," he said, his voice low and intense. "They fear what they don't understand. They fear our power." Power. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. What kind of power? Eloan felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that she was stepping into a world far more complex and dangerous than she could have ever imagined. He saw the fear in her eyes, and his expression softened. "Don't worry," he said, his voice reassuring. "I won't let them harm you. I promise." He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing against her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a wave of warmth through her body. It was a gesture of comfort, of reassurance, but it was also something more. It was a spark of connection, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that was forming between them. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his, trying to find answers in their golden depths. She saw strength, determination, and a fierce protectiveness. But she also saw something else, of vulnerability, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "What are you?" she whispered, the question a culmination of all her fears and uncertainties. He held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. Then he took a deep breath and said, "I'm a werewolf, alone. And you're my soulmate." The statement was delivered with such quiet intensity, it stole Aloan's next breath. The soft hooting of an owl returned, this time closer, almost as a sign of agreement. Chapter 4. The Scent of Pine and Blood. Werewolf. Soulmate. The words echoed in Aloan's mind, a bizarre, unbelievable symphony of the impossible. Her rational mind rejected it, screamed at her that it was madness, a delusion brought on by stress and fear. Yet, deep down, a part of her, the part that had always felt a connection to something beyond the ordinary, recognized a truth in his words. It was as if her mother's stories, once dismissed as fantasy, had suddenly come to life, weaving themselves into the fabric of her reality. The scent of pine, now inextricably linked to Reese, intensified, mingling with the metallic tang that she now understood with a chilling certainty was the scent of blood. It wasn't a repulsive smell, not as she would have expected. Instead, it was strangely alluring, stirring something primal within her, a connection to the wild, untamed nature of the man, the creature standing before her. "Soulmate?" she repeated, the word a shaky whisper, her voice barely audible above the rustling of leaves and the distant howl of a wolf. She wasn't sure. Reese nodded, his golden eyes, now seeming even more luminous in the dim light, never leaving hers. "It's a bond," he explained, his voice low and resonant, "forged by the first moon. It's stronger than any other connection. It's inevitable. Inevitable." The word resonated with a sense of fate, of destiny, a concept she had always resisted. Yet, looking into Reese's eyes, she felt a pull, a connection that defied logic and reason. It was as if she had known him forever, as if their souls were intertwined, bound together by an ancient, unbreakable force. "But how?" she asked, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of it all. "How is this possible?" He hesitated, his gaze shifting to the moon, now partially obscured by the dense canopy of leaves. "The first moon," he said, his voice tinged with a reverence that bordered on worship. "It holds a power and ancient magic that connects certain souls. It chooses and it binds." "And it chose us?" Aloan asked, a mixture of awe and trepidation filling her voice. He nodded, turning back to face her, his golden eyes searching hers. "Yes," he confirmed. "It chose us." The implications of his words were staggering. It meant that her life, her very existence, was intertwined with his, with this supernatural world she had only just discovered. It meant that she was no longer just Aloan Graves, the woman returning to her childhood home to mourn her mother. She was something more, something different. "But the hunters," she said, remembering the immediate danger they faced. "They want to kill us?" His expression hardened, the vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier replaced by a fierce determination. "They want to destroy the bond," he said, his voice tight with anger. "They fear the power it holds. They fear what we can become together." "What can we become?" Aloan asked, her voice a mixture of fear and curiosity. He hesitated again, as if struggling with how much to reveal. "We can protect our kind," he finally said. "We can maintain the balance between the human world and ours." Balance. Another word that resonated with a deeper meaning. It suggested a delicate equilibrium, a precarious harmony between two worlds that were constantly at odds. And she, Aloan Graves, was now a part of that balance, a key player in a game she didn't even understand. Suddenly, a twig snapped nearby, the sound sharp and distinct in the otherwise silent woods. Reese instantly tensed, his body going rigid, his senses on high alert. He pulled Aloan closer, shielding her with his body. "They're here," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his golden eyes scanning the darkness. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped Aloan's heart. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, preparing her for a fight she didn't know how to fight. Rhys drew a long, silver knife from a sheath strapped to his leg. The moonlight glinted off its polished surface, turning it into a deadly, shimmering weapon. The sight of it sent a shiver down Aloan's spine, a stark reminder of the very real danger they were in. "Stay close to me," he whispered, his voice firm and commanding. "And don't make a sound." He moved forward, slowly, cautiously, his body a coiled spring ready to unleash. Aloan followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. The scent of pine and blood was overwhelming now, a constant reminder of the presence of the man the werewolf who was her protector, her soulmate. And as they moved deeper into the darkness, she knew that their journey had just begun. A low growl, unmistakably animalistic, echoed from the shadows ahead, confirming her fears. Chapter 5. A pact sealed in moonlight. The growl resonated through the trees, a primal sound that sent shivers down Aloan's spine. It was close, too close. Rhys pushed her behind a thick, ancient oak, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal arms. He stood in front of her, a silent guardian, the silver knife gleaming in his hand. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "No matter what happens, don't move." Aloan wanted to protest, to tell him she wouldn't leave him, but the look in his eyes, a mixture of fierce determination and a deep, underlying fear, silenced her. She nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding, his muscles coiling. Then, with a speed that defied belief, he moved. He disappeared into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness, leaving Aloan alone, hidden behind the ancient oak. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the frantic beating of Aloan's heart. She strained her ears, trying to hear any sign of Rhys, any indication of what was happening. But the woods remained eerily silent, holding their breath, waiting. Then, the silence shattered. A chorus of snarls and growls erupted, followed by the sickening thud of bodies colliding, the clash of metal on metal. Aloan squeezed her eyes shut, her hands clamped over her ears, trying to block out the sounds of the battle. But she couldn't block out the images that flooded her mind, images of Rhys, fighting for his life, fighting for her life. She peeked through a gap in the branches, her heart leaping into her throat. She could see figures moving in the darkness, shadowy shapes engaged in a brutal, desperate struggle. She saw flashes of silver, the glint of moonlight on blades, the dark stains of blood spreading on the forest floor. She saw Rhys. He was fighting with a ferocity she had never imagined, his movements fluid and powerful, his golden eyes burning with a primal rage. He was a creature of the night, a warrior born, his every move a testament to his strength and his will to survive. But he was outnumbered. She could see at least 3 figures attacking him, their movements coordinated, their intentions deadly. They were the hunters, she realized, the ancient order dedicated to eradicating his kind. And they were relentless. One of the hunters lunged at Rhys, his blade aimed at his heart. Aloan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Rhys dodged the attack, his body twisting with an unnatural agility. He retaliated, his silver knife slashing out, finding its mark. The hunter cried out in pain, stumbling back, clutching his arm. But the other 2 hunters pressed their attack, forcing Rhys to retreat. He was bleeding, she could see, dark stains spreading on his shirt. He was tiring, his movements becoming slower, less precise. Aloan couldn't stand it anymore. She couldn't just hide behind the tree and watch him die. She had to do something. She remembered the silver ring, the one she had found in the library, the one that had sent a jolt of energy through her when she had first put it on. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the cool metal. She pulled it out, the moonstone shimmering in the dim light. She didn't know what it was, what power it held, but she knew she had to try. She slipped the ring onto her finger, and the familiar surge of energy coursed through her, leaving her breathless. She stepped out from behind the tree, her heart pounding, her legs trembling. "Reese!" she cried out, her voice echoing through the woods. The hunters turned towards her, their eyes widening in surprise. Reese, momentarily distracted, took a blow to the shoulder, his body staggering. One of the hunters, a tall, gaunt man with a cruel smile, started towards her. Well, he said, his voice dripping with malice. "The daughter of the first moon. We've been waiting for you." Eloan stood her ground, her fear battling with a newfound determination. She held up her hand, the silver ring gleaming in the moonlight. "Stay away from him," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The hunter laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And what are you going to do, little girl? Curse us with your pretty ring?" He lunged at her, his blade raised. Eloan closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, she heard a roar, a sound of pure rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the woods. She opened her eyes and saw Reese standing between her and the hunter, his body transformed. He was no longer the man she had met in her room. He was something else. Larger, more powerful, more animalistic. His eyes were glowing with a fierce, golden light, his teeth bared in a terrifying snarl. He was a werewolf, in all his terrifying glory. He swatted the hunter away as if he were a mere insect, sending him flying through the air to crash against a tree. The other two hunters, momentarily stunned by Reese's transformation, hesitated. Reese turned to Eloan, his golden eyes softening as he looked at her. He reached out a massive, fur-covered hand and gently touched her cheek. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a deep, guttural growl, yet filled with a tenderness that surprised her. She nodded, her eyes wide with awe and acceptance. He turned back to the remaining hunters, his body radiating power and rage. "Leave," he growled, his voice a terrifying warning. "Or face the consequences." The hunters, realizing they were outmatched, exchanged a look of fear and retreated, disappearing into the shadows. Reese watched them go, his body still tense, his eyes still glowing. Then slowly he began to change back. His fur receded, his claws retracted, his features softened. He returned to his human form, exhausted, bleeding, but alive. He looked at Eloan, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something else. Something deeper, something that spoke of the bond that connected them. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "You saved me." Eloan shook her head. "You saved me," she said, her voice trembling. "We saved each other." She looked down at the ring on her finger. The faint glow emanating was almost imperceptible, but she knew. They stood there, in the middle of the moonlit woods, surrounded by the scent of pine and blood, their hearts beating in unison. A pact had been sealed, a pact of protection, of trust, of love. And as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, a new chapter in their intertwined destinies began. The distant, mournful howl of a lone wolf echoed, a final note in the symphony of the night. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Ancient Woods. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pale pink and gold, filtering through the dense canopy of the whispering woods. Reese, leaning heavily on Eloan for support, stumbled along a barely discernible path. The adrenaline that had fueled his transformation and the ensuing fight had faded, leaving him weak and drained. The wounds inflicted by the hunters, though partially healed by his werewolf physiology, still throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. Eloan, despite her own exhaustion and the lingering fear from the night's events, remained surprisingly strong. She supported Reese's weight, her arm around his waist, her other hand holding his, their fingers intertwined. The silver ring on her finger felt warm against her skin, a constant reminder of the power she had wielded, the power that had saved them both. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft, breaking the silence that had fallen between them since the hunter's retreat. Reese hesitated, his golden eyes, now devoid of their supernatural glow, clouded with pain and fatigue. "Somewhere safe," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "Somewhere they won't find us for a while." He led her deeper into the woods, the trees growing taller, older, their branches intertwined, creating a cathedral-like ceiling above them. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of moss, decaying leaves, and the lingering aroma of pine that clung to Reese like a second skin. Aloan noticed the subtle changes in the landscape, the shift from ordinary woods to something more. The trees seemed to whisper secrets, the wind rustling through their leaves, carrying ancient voices. She felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had been here before, in a dream, or perhaps in a past life. "This place," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "It feels different." Reese nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It is," he confirmed. "This is the heart of the Whispering Woods. It's sacred ground." Sacred. The word resonated with a power that sent a shiver down Aloan's spine. It was a place of ancient magic, a place where the veil between the human world and the supernatural world was thin, almost non-existent. They reached a clearing, bathed in the soft, golden light of the rising sun. In the center stood a small, stone cottage, almost completely hidden by overgrown vines and flowering bushes. It looked as if it had been there for centuries, a part of the woods itself, blending seamlessly with its surroundings. "This is it," Reese said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and weariness. "My sanctuary." He led her to the cottage, the wooden door creaking open with a groan as he pushed it inward. The interior was small and rustic, but surprisingly cozy. A fire crackled merrily in a stone fireplace, casting a warm, inviting glow over the room. There was a simple wooden table and chairs, a bed covered with a thick, fur blanket, and shelves filled with books and strange, intriguing objects. Reese gently lowered himself onto a chair, his body slumping with exhaustion. Aloan immediately went to him, her concern evident in her eyes. "You're hurt," she said, her voice filled with worry. "We need to tend to your wounds." He nodded, wincing as he shifted his position. "There's a healing salve," he said, gesturing towards a shelf filled with jars and bottles, in the blue jar made with herbs from the woods. Aloan found the jar, its contents a thick, green paste with a pungent, earthy aroma. She knelt beside Reese, gently removing his torn and blood-stained shirt. Her fingers trembled as she touched his skin, the warmth of his body sending a jolt of awareness through her. His torso was covered in scratches and bruises, some of them deep and still bleeding. Aloan carefully applied the salve, her touch gentle and soothing. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the pain he was trying to hide. As she worked, she noticed the intricate patterns of scars that crisscrossed his back and shoulders, a testament to a life lived on the edge, a life of constant danger and conflict. They were the marks of a warrior, a protector, a survivor. "These scars," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her fingers tracing the lines of one particularly long, jagged scar. "They tell a story." Reese looked down at her, his golden eyes meeting hers. He saw the compassion in her gaze, the genuine concern, and something else in acceptance, a lack of judgment that surprised him. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "They do," he confirmed. "A story of battles fought and lost. A story of survival and sacrifice." He told her about his life, about growing up in the Whispering Woods, about learning to control his werewolf nature, about the constant threat of the hunters. He spoke of his pack, his family, the ones he had lost, the ones he was still fighting to protect. Aloan listened, her heart aching for him, for the burden he carried, for the loneliness he had endured. She realized that beneath the fierce exterior, beneath the power and the danger, he was just a man who had been forced to fight for his survival, a man who had known too much pain and loss. As he spoke, she felt the bond between them strengthening, deepening. It was no longer just a supernatural connection, a mystical force forged by the first moon. It was something more, something human, something built on shared vulnerability, on mutual respect, on a growing understanding and affection. When she had finished tending to his wounds, she sat beside him, their shoulders touching. The silence that fell between them was comfortable, filled with a sense of peace and connection. "Thank you," Rhys said, his voice soft, his golden eyes filled with gratitude. "For everything." Eloan smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes.
"You don't have to thank me," she said.
"We're in this together." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The touch was electric, sending a wave of warmth through her body. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and she saw a question there, a hesitant hope. And just below that, a question of the ring. He raised her hand slightly, the gesture almost imperceptible, but a quiet, "What now?" The silver ring on Eloan's finger caught his gaze, and the question was answered. They had found each other, through the magic and the danger. The ring was a symbol, a reminder of the power that had brought them together and the challenges they would face together. The fire crackled, a comforting rhythm against the backdrop of their whispered, unspoken vows. Chapter 7. The Mark of the First Moon. The warmth of the fire and the lingering scent of the healing salve created a cocoon of intimacy within the small cottage. Eloan and Rhys sat close, their hands still clasped, the silence between them comfortable and charged with unspoken emotions. The events of the night, the fear, the violence, the revelation of Rhys's true nature, and the undeniable connection between them had left them both raw and vulnerable, yet strangely connected. Rhys's gaze kept returning to the silver ring on Eloan's finger, the moonstone shimmering softly in the firelight. It was a tangible symbol of their bond, a reminder of the magic that had brought them together and the power that now resided within her. "The ring," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "it amplified your inherent abilities." Eloan looked down at the ring, turning it slowly on her finger. She remembered the surge of energy she had felt when she first put it on, and again when she had used it to defend Rhys against the hunters. It was a power she didn't understand, a power that both frightened and fascinated her. "My mother, she never told me about abilities," Eloan said, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion and wonder. "She spoke of the first moon, of its power, but it was always just a story." Rhys nodded, his golden eyes understanding.
"She was protecting you," he said.
"Keeping you hidden, hoping you would never have to face this life." He gently took her hand, his fingers tracing the outline of the ring. "The first moon," he explained, "it doesn't just forge bonds between soulmates. It also awakens a latent power within the daughter of the first moon. A power that has been passed down through generations." "What kind of power?" Eloan asked, her voice a breathless whisper. Rhys hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "It's a connection to the earth," he finally said, "to the natural world, to the magic that flows through everything. It's a power of healing, of protection, of transformation." Transformation. The word resonated with Eloan, echoing the changes she was already feeling within herself, the shift in her perception of the world, the awakening of a part of her that had always been dormant. He gently turned her hand over, revealing her palm. In the center, barely visible, was a faint, crescent-shaped mark, shimmering with a silvery light. It was the mark of the first moon, a sign of her heritage, her destiny. "It appears only under the light of the first moon," Rhys explained, his voice filled with awe, "and only to those who are meant to see it." Eloan stared at the mark, her heart pounding in her chest. It was beautiful, delicate, yet it held a power that she could feel pulsing beneath her skin. It was a connection to something ancient, something primal, something magical. I don't know what to do with it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to control it." Rhys smiled, a reassuring smile that reached his eyes. "You will learn," he said. "I will teach you. We will learn together." He told her about the daughters of the first moon who had come before her, about their powers, their responsibilities, their struggles. He spoke of their connection to the werewolves, of the ancient pact that bound them together, of their shared duty to protect the balance between the human world and the supernatural world. He explained that the hunters, driven by fear and a thirst for power, sought to destroy that balance, to eradicate the werewolves and claim the power of the first moon for themselves. He spoke of the ongoing war, the centuries of conflict, the constant threat that loomed over them. Eloan listened, her mind reeling from the weight of the information, from the enormity of the responsibility that was now hers. She was no longer just Eloan Graves, a woman grieving the loss of her mother. She was the daughter of the first moon, a key player in an ancient war, a protector of a world she had only just discovered. She looked at Rhys, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and determination. She saw the strength in him, the unwavering loyalty, the fierce protectiveness. She also saw the vulnerability, the loneliness, the burden he had carried for so long. And she knew that she was not alone. She had him, her soulmate, her protector, her guide. They would face this together. They would learn together. They would fight together. She reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. "We have to." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a moment, savoring the connection, the comfort, the love that was blossoming between them. "We will," he said, his voice husky with emotion. He opened his eyes, looking at her, his golden gaze filled with a depth of feeling that took her breath away. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tentative kiss at first, then deepening, becoming more passionate, more demanding. It was a kiss that spoke of shared vulnerability, of mutual respect, of a growing love that defied logic and reason. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, their pact, their destiny. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the cottage. The scent of pine and healing salve mingled with the sweet aroma of their shared breath. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating the whispering woods, Eloan and Rhys embarked on their journey together, a journey of discovery, of danger, of love. The mark on her palm pulsed, a gentle reminder of the power and responsibility they now shared. Chapter 8. Forbidden Knowledge Unveiled. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, a stark contrast to the violence and chaos of their first encounter. Within the sanctuary of Rhys's cottage, hidden deep within the whispering woods, Eloan began her immersion into a world she had only glimpsed in her mother's fantastical stories. It was a world of ancient magic, of werewolves and hunters, of a bond forged by the first moon, and a destiny she was only beginning to understand. Rhys, patient and surprisingly gentle, became her teacher, her guide, her confidant. He shared his knowledge of the woods, of the creatures that inhabited them, of the delicate balance between the human and supernatural worlds. He taught her about the herbs and plants that grew in abundance, their healing properties, their hidden powers. He showed her how to track animals, how to read the signs of the forest, how to listen to the whispers of the wind. But it was the knowledge of her own heritage, of the daughters of the first moon, that captivated Eloan the most. Rhys had a collection of old, leather-bound books, passed down through generations of his pack, filled with stories, legends, and rituals. They spent hours poring over the faded pages, deciphering the ancient texts, piecing together the fragments of a forgotten history. Eloan learned about the powers that resided within her, the connection to the earth, the ability to heal, to protect, to transform. She discovered that the silver ring was more than just a symbol of her bond with Rhys. It was a conduit, a focus for her power, amplifying her abilities. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Rhys brought out a small, wooden box, intricately carved with symbols similar to those on Eloan's ring. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, dried flower, its petals a pale, silvery blue. "This," Rhys said, his voice hushed with reverence, "is a moon bloom. It only blossoms under the light of the first moon, and it holds a powerful magic." Eloan reached out and touched the delicate petals, feeling a faint tingle in her fingertips. "What kind of magic?" she asked. Rhys hesitated, his golden eyes clouded with a mixture of concern and reluctance. "It can enhance your connection to the first moon," he finally said, "allowing you to access deeper levels of power." He explained that the moon bloom was a key ingredient in a ritual, A ritual that could fully awaken her potential, but it was also a ritual that was forbidden. Forbidden? Eloan asked, her brow furrowing in confusion.
Why?
Rhys sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Because it's dangerous, he said. It can overwhelm you, consume you, if you're not prepared. And it can attract the attention of others. Others. He meant the hunters. Eloan realized, the ancient order that sought to destroy them and claim the power of the first moon for themselves. But if it can help me help us, shouldn't we try? Eloan asked, her voice filled with a growing determination. Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes searching hers. He saw the fire in her gaze, the courage, the willingness to embrace her destiny, no matter the cost. But he also saw the fear, the uncertainty, the vulnerability. It's not that simple, he said, his voice gentle. The ritual, it requires a sacrifice. Something precious. Sacrifice. The word sent a chill down Eloan's spine. What kind of sacrifice? What would she have to give up? Rhys saw the fear in her eyes, and he reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. We don't have to decide now, he said, his voice reassuring. We have time. We'll learn more, we'll prepare, and we'll face it together. But Eloan knew that the decision was inevitable. The hunters were still out there, searching for them, growing stronger. And she, as the daughter of the first moon, had a responsibility, a duty, to protect her kind, to protect the balance, to protect Rhys. She looked at the moon bloom, its delicate petals shimmering in the firelight. It was a symbol of power, of potential, of sacrifice. And she knew that her journey, her transformation, was far from over. The whispers of doubt, though present, were overshadowed by her determination. The sound of the wind, unusually loud tonight, seemed to echo her internal turmoil. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The tranquility of their secluded life in the whispering woods was shattered one crisp autumn evening. The leaves had turned vibrant shades of red and gold, painting the forest in a breathtaking tapestry of color. But the beauty of the landscape couldn't mask the growing sense of unease that had settled over Eloan and Rhys. They had been practicing Eloan's burgeoning abilities, focusing on her connection to the earth, her ability to draw energy from the natural world. She had shown remarkable progress, her healing touch becoming stronger, her sensitivity to the subtle shifts in the forest's energy becoming more acute. But with each passing day, the threat of the hunters loomed larger, casting a shadow over their newfound peace. Rhys had become increasingly vigilant, his senses constantly on alert, scanning the woods for any sign of intrusion. He had taught Eloan how to mask their scent, how to move silently through the trees, how to blend in with their surroundings. But he knew that it was only a matter of time before the hunters found them. That evening, as they sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal of roasted rabbit and foraged vegetables, Rhys's senses suddenly flared. He stiffened, his golden eyes narrowing, his body tensing like a coiled spring. "What is it?" Eloan asked, her voice filled with alarm, instantly sensing the shift in his demeanor. He didn't answer immediately, his head cocked to one side, listening intently. Then, he slowly rose to his feet, his hand reaching for the silver knife strapped to his leg. "They're here," he said, his voice low and grim. "And they're not alone." Eloan's heart leaped into her throat. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, preparing her for a fight. But this time, it wasn't just fear she felt. It was also anger, a righteous fury at the constant threat, the intrusion into their lives, the disruption of their peace. They quickly extinguished the fire, plunging the cottage into darkness. Rhys moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit woods. Eloan joined him, her hand instinctively reaching for the silver ring on her finger. She could see them now, figures moving through the trees, their shadows flickering in the moonlight. They were numerous, far more than the 3 they had encountered before. And they were moving with a purpose, a determination that sent a chill down her spine. "How did they find us?" Eloan whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Rhys shook his head, his expression grim.
"I don't know," he said.
"But they're not just hunters. There's something else, something darker." He turned to Eloan, his golden eyes filled with a fierce urgency.
"We need to leave," he said. "Now."
"We can't fight them here." They slipped out of the cottage, moving silently through the darkness, heading deeper into the woods, away from the approaching threat. Rhys led the way, his senses guiding them, his body a shield between Aloan and the danger. But the hunters were relentless. They were tracking them, their movements swift and coordinated, their presence growing closer with each passing moment. Aloan could feel their hatred, their malice, their determination to destroy them. And then, she sensed something else, something that sent a wave of fear washing over her. It was a dark, oppressive energy, a presence that felt ancient, powerful, and utterly malevolent. "Rhys," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is that? What do you feel?" He stopped, his body rigid, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. "It's the Elder," he said, his voice barely audible. "He's here."
The Elder.
The name sent a shiver down Aloan's spine. Rhys had spoken of him before, a legendary figure among the hunters, an ancient being of immense power, a master of dark magic. He was the one who led them, the one who fueled their hatred, the one who sought to claim the power of the first moon for himself. Aloan knew that this was no ordinary fight. This was a battle for their survival, a confrontation with a force far greater than anything they had faced before. She knew they must be near. A low, guttural growl, different from Rhys's, echoed from all directions, signaling the imminent confrontation. Chapter 10. A dance of fear and desire. The growl reverberated through the woods, a chilling symphony of impending doom. Aloan and Rhys stood back to back, surrounded by the encroaching darkness, the hunters closing in like wolves circling their prey. The air crackled with tension, thick with the scent of pine, blood, and the oppressive, malevolent energy of the Elder. Rhys drew his silver knife, the moonlight glinting off its polished surface. Aloan, her hand instinctively clutching the silver ring, felt a surge of power coursing through her veins. It was a mixture of fear and adrenaline, but also something else of fierce determination, a primal instinct to protect herself, to protect him. "Stay close to me," Rhys whispered, his voice tight with urgency, his golden eyes scanning the shadows. "Don't engage unless you have to. Focus on your connection to the earth, draw strength from it." The first hunter emerged from the darkness, a tall, gaunt figure with a cruel smile and eyes that gleamed with malice. He was followed by others, their numbers far greater than Aloan had anticipated. They were armed with swords, knives, and crossbows, their weapons reflecting the moonlight, turning them into deadly, shimmering extensions of their hatred. And then he appeared, the Elder. He was even more terrifying than Aloan had imagined. He was ancient, his face a mask of wrinkles and scars, his eyes burning with a cold, dark fire. He was cloaked in black, his presence radiating an aura of power and malevolence that seemed to suck the very air out of the woods. He stopped a short distance from them, his gaze fixed on Aloan, his lips curling into a sneer. "The daughter of the first moon," he said, his voice a rasping whisper that seemed to carry on the wind. "We have been waiting for you." Aloan stood her ground, her fear battling with a growing sense of defiance. She felt Rhys's presence behind her, his body a solid, reassuring wall of strength. "You will not have me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, amplified by the power of the ring. "You will not have the first moon." The Elder laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the trees. "You have no idea of the power you possess," he said. "A power that will be mine." He raised his hand, and the hunters surged forward, their weapons raised, their eyes filled with a bloodthirsty frenzy. The battle began. It was a chaotic, brutal clash of steel and claw, of magic and muscle. Rhys fought with a ferocity that Aloan had never seen before, his movements fluid and powerful, his silver knife a blur of deadly motion. He was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting down hunters with a savage grace, his golden eyes burning with a primal rage. Aloan, drawing strength from the earth, from the trees, from the very air around her, fought alongside him. She used her newfound abilities, her connection to the natural world, to deflect attacks, to heal Rhys's wounds, to create a shield of protection around them. But the elder remained aloof, watching the battle unfold with a cold, detached amusement. He was waiting, biding his time, his power building, preparing for his moment to strike. As the fight raged on, Eloan found herself drawn to Rhys, her movements mirroring his, their bodies moving in a strange, synchronized dance. It was a dance of fear and desire, of desperation and determination, of a bond that was growing stronger with each passing moment. She saw the way he looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of protectiveness and something else. Something deeper, something that spoke of the connection between them, the inevitable pull of their souls. She felt it too, the undeniable attraction, the primal need, the desire that burned beneath the surface of their fear. It was a dangerous distraction, a vulnerability that could cost them their lives. But she couldn't deny it, couldn't suppress it. It was a part of who they were, a part of their bond, a part of their destiny. Suddenly, the elder made his move. He raised his hand, and a bolt of dark energy shot towards Eloan, faster than anything she had ever seen.
Rhys saw it coming.
He reacted instantly, throwing himself in front of Eloan, shielding her with his body. The energy struck him, sending him crashing to the ground, his body convulsing. Eloan screamed, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She rushed to his side, her hands hovering over his body, desperate to heal him, to save him. But the elder was upon her, his hand reaching out, his fingers closing around her wrist, his grip like a vice. "Now," he said, his voice a triumphant whisper, "you are mine." Eloan looked into his eyes, saw the darkness there, the ancient evil, the insatiable hunger for power. And she knew that she had to fight, not just for herself, not just for Rhys, but for the entire balance of the world itself. The ring on her finger burned, a white-hot intensity that was both agonizing and empowering. A distant, piercing howl, almost a scream, sliced through the night, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Chapter 11. The Weight of Generations. The elder's grip tightened, his cold, skeletal fingers digging into Eloan's flesh. The dark energy that radiated from him pulsed against her skin, a suffocating, malevolent force that threatened to consume her. But the burning intensity of the ring, fueled by her fear, her love for Rhys, and a surge of primal power, held him at bay, creating a shimmering barrier between them. "You cannot resist me," the elder hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, his eyes burning with a cold, dark fire. "The power of the first moon will be mine. You are merely a vessel, a tool." Eloan gritted her teeth, her body trembling with the effort of resisting his power. She could see Rhys lying on the ground, his body still, his golden eyes closed. The sight of him, vulnerable and wounded, fueled her rage, her determination, her desperate need to protect him. "I am more than a vessel," she said, her voice shaking but filled with a newfound strength, amplified by the ring. "I am the daughter of the first moon, and I will not be your tool." She focused her will, drawing on the energy of the earth, the trees, the very air around her. She felt the power of the first moon coursing through her veins, a torrent of ancient magic that surged through her body, pushing back against the elder's darkness. The ring on her finger blazed with a blinding light, the moonstone radiating a power that seemed to fill the entire woods. The ground beneath her feet trembled, the trees swayed, the wind howled. The elder recoiled, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. He had underestimated her, underestimated the power of the first moon, the strength of her bond with Rhys. "Impossible," he gasped, his voice a strangled whisper. "You cannot wield such power. You are untrained, uninitiated. I am what I need to be," Eloan retorted, her voice resonating with the power of generations of daughters of the first moon. She raised her hand, the ring blazing, and unleashed a wave of pure energy, a force of nature that slammed into the elder, throwing him back against a tree with a sickening thud. The remaining hunters, witnessing the display of power, hesitated, their bloodlust momentarily replaced by fear. They looked at the elder, their leader, their source of strength, now lying crumpled on the ground, his body smoking. Eloan didn't hesitate. She turned her attention to the hunters, her eyes blazing with the power of the first moon. "Leave," she commanded, her voice echoing through the woods, a voice that was not entirely her own, a voice that carried the weight of centuries. "And never return." The hunters, terrified by the power she wielded, by the wrath of the daughter of the first moon, scrambled to their feet and fled, disappearing into the darkness, their retreat a chaotic scramble of fear. Eloan stood there, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The power that had surged through her receded, leaving her weak and drained, but also exhilarated. She turned to Rhys, her heart pounding in her chest, her fear returning with a vengeance. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him, her hands hovering over his body, desperate to heal him. He was still unconscious, his breathing shallow, his skin pale. The dark energy of the elder had left its mark, a wound that went deeper than flesh and bone. She placed her hands on his chest, focusing her will, channeling the remaining energy of the first moon into him. She whispered words of healing, ancient words that she didn't understand, words that came from a place deep within her, a place of instinct, of connection, of love. Slowly, his breathing deepened, his color returned, his golden eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of confusion, relief, and adoration. "Eloan," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You saved me again." She smiled, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We saved each other," she said, her voice trembling. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the lines of her face, his touch gentle and reassuring. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice filled with awe. They held each other, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating in unison. The weight of generations, the burden of their destiny, the constant threat of the hunters, all seemed to fade away, replaced by the simple, profound connection between them. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, casting a golden glow over the whispering woods, Eloan and Rhys knew that their battle was far from over. But they also knew that they were not alone. They had each other, their bond stronger than ever, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness. The faint crescent mark on her palm, almost invisible now, was a silent testament to the power she held and the responsibilities that awaited. Chapter 12. Shattered Reflections of Truth. The immediate aftermath of the battle left Eloan and Rhys physically and emotionally drained. They returned to the cottage, a haven that now felt less secure, the silence within its walls heavy with the echoes of their near defeat. Rhys, though weakened, insisted on reinforcing the protective wards around their sanctuary, his movements fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and a deep-seated need to safeguard Eloan. Eloan, meanwhile, tended to his remaining injuries, her touch gentle yet precise, the silver ring on her finger pulsing with a subtle warmth as she channeled her healing energy. The events of the night had shaken her, revealing not only the extent of her own power but also the terrifying reality of the Elder's malevolence and the relentless nature of the hunter's pursuit. As she worked, she couldn't shake the image of Rhys falling, struck down by the Elder's dark energy. The fear she had felt in that moment, the sheer terror of losing him, had resonated deep within her soul, solidifying the depth of her feelings, the undeniable truth of their bond. "You risked your life for me," she said softly, her voice laced with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "You could have died." Rhys met her gaze, his golden eyes filled with a tenderness that took her breath away. "You are my soulmate, Eloan," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "My life is yours. I would gladly give it to protect you." His words, spoken with such unwavering conviction, sent a shiver down her spine. It was a declaration of love, a testament to the depth of their connection, a bond that transcended the supernatural, the inevitable pull of their destiny. But even in that moment of shared vulnerability, a nagging doubt persisted within Eloan's mind. The elder's words, his taunts about her being a vessel, a tool, echoed in her thoughts, casting a shadow over her newfound confidence. He said I was just a vessel, she said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes searching Rhys's. A tool for the first moon's power. Is that true? Rhys hesitated, his gaze shifting away, a flicker of unease crossing his features. It was a subtle reaction, almost imperceptible, but Eloan, attuned to his every nuance, caught it.
Rhys?
She pressed, her voice laced with a growing apprehension.
What aren't you telling me?
He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries, the burden of secrets long kept. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, his touch both comforting and cautious. There are things about the daughters of the first moon, he began, his voice hesitant, that are not widely known. Things that even I am only beginning to understand. He told her about the ancient texts, the fragmented prophecies, the whispers of a darker side to the first moon's power. He spoke of a potential for corruption, a risk of being consumed by the very magic they wielded. The elder, Rhys explained, he seeks to exploit that vulnerability, to twist the power of the first moon to his own ends. He believes that by controlling the daughter of the first moon, he can unlock a forbidden magic, a power that could destroy the balance between worlds. Eloan listened, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind reeling from the implications of his words. It was a terrifying prospect, a possibility that she had never considered, a darkness that lurked beneath the surface of her newfound abilities. So, what he said about being a vessel, she said, her voice trembling, there's some truth to it? Rhys met her gaze, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. There is a risk, he admitted. But it's not inevitable. You are not just a vessel, Eloan. You are so much more. You have a choice. You have free will. You can control the power, shape it, use it for good. His words, though meant to be reassuring, only served to amplify Eloan's doubts. She looked at the silver ring on her finger, the moonstone shimmering softly in the dim light. It was a symbol of her power, her connection to Rhys, her destiny. But it was also a reminder of the potential for darkness, the risk of losing herself to the very magic she wielded. The reflection of her own face, fragmented and distorted in an antique mirror hanging on the cottage wall, seemed to mirror her internal turmoil. She saw strength and vulnerability, courage and fear, love and doubt, all intertwined, all battling for dominance. She was the daughter of the first moon, a protector, a warrior, a soulmate. But she was also human, and she was afraid. The silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the crackling embers of the dying fire, a stark reminder of the dwindling warmth and security. Chapter 13. The Hunter's Pursuit. Despite Rhys's efforts to reinforce the wards around the cottage, the sense of security they had once found within its walls had vanished. The Elder's attack had shattered their illusion of safety, revealing the vulnerability of their sanctuary and the relentless determination of their enemies. They knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters found them again. Rhys, driven by a primal need to protect Eloan, decided they had to move. He had a plan, a destination in mind, a place he believed might offer them temporary refuge and a chance to regroup, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the Elder. There's a place, he said, his voice low and urgent, an old sanctuary, used by my pack generations ago. It's hidden deep within the mountains, beyond the whispering woods. It's difficult to reach, difficult to find, but it's our best chance. Eloan, still reeling from the revelation of the darker side of her power and the weight it added to her shoulders, nodded in agreement. She trusted Rhys, trusted his instincts, trusted his unwavering commitment to her safety. She knew that staying in the cottage was no longer an option. They packed quickly, taking only the essentials: food, water, weapons, and the ancient texts that held the key to understanding Eloan's heritage and her powers. As they left the cottage, stepping back into the moonlit woods, Eloan felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the brief period of peace they had found within its walls. The journey was arduous, a test of their endurance and their resolve. They traveled mostly at night, moving silently through the dense undergrowth, avoiding the main paths, relying on Rhys's knowledge of the woods and his heightened senses to guide them. The hunters were still out there, searching for them. Eloan could feel their presence, a constant, nagging pressure at the edge of her awareness. She could sense their hatred, their determination, their relentless pursuit. Rhys, ever vigilant, taught her how to further mask their scent, how to blend in with their surroundings, how to use the natural world to their advantage. He showed her how to draw energy from the earth, how to channel it into her movements, enhancing her speed, her strength, her agility. But even with their precautions, they couldn't completely evade the hunters. Several times, they were forced to confront small groups of them, engaging in brief, brutal skirmishes. Eloan, drawing on her newfound abilities, fought alongside Rhys, her fear battling with a growing sense of confidence, her power increasing with each encounter. One evening, as they were resting in a hidden cave, high in the foothills of the mountains, they were ambushed. A larger group of hunters, led by a particularly vicious and skilled warrior, attacked them without warning. The fight was fierce and desperate. Rhys, protecting Eloan, fought with a savage grace, his silver knife a blur of deadly motion. Eloan, using her connection to the earth, created shields of stone and vines, deflecting attacks and hindering the hunters' movements. But the hunters were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Rhys was wounded, a deep gash on his arm, his movements slowing. Eloan, exhausted and struggling to maintain her defenses, felt her strength waning. Just when it seemed they were about to be overwhelmed, Eloan remembered the moonbloom, the dried flower that Rhys had shown her, the flower that held the key to unlocking a deeper level of her power. She knew the risks, the potential for corruption, the danger of attracting the elders' attention. But she also knew that they were out of options, that they were facing certain defeat. She made a decision. A desperate, dangerous gamble. She reached into her pouch, her fingers closing around the delicate petals of the moonbloom. She crushed it in her hand, releasing its potent magic, inhaling its essence. A surge of power coursed through her veins, a torrent of ancient energy that left her breathless, her body trembling. Her vision blurred, her senses heightened, her connection to the earth amplified 1,000-fold. She raised her hand, the silver ring on her finger blazing with a blinding light. A wave of pure energy erupted from her, a force of nature that slammed into the hunters, throwing them back against the cave walls, incapacitating them. The remaining hunters, terrified by the display of power, fled into the darkness, their retreat a chaotic scramble of fear. Eloan stood there, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The power that had surged through her receded, leaving her weak and drained, but also changed. She could feel it, the darkness. It was almost tangible, a whisper at the edge of the all-encompassing power. A low, guttural growl, not from any of the hunters, echoed from deeper within the cave, a sound of both warning and anticipation. Chapter 14. A Sanctuary Found and Lost. The growl echoed through the cave, a primal sound that sent shivers down Eloan's spine. It wasn't the sound of a hunter, nor was it Rhys. It was something else, something ancient, something wild. Rhys, weakened but alert, moved protectively in front of Eloan, his silver knife held ready, his golden eyes scanning the darkness of the cave. "What is it?" Eloan whispered, her voice trembling, still reeling from the surge of power that had coursed through her and the lingering darkness she felt as an after-effect. Rhys didn't answer immediately, his senses straining, trying to identify the source of the growl. Then, his eyes widened in surprise and recognition. "It's a guardian," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I thought they were just legends from the depths of the cave." A figure emerged, slowly, cautiously, its form silhouetted against the faint light filtering in from the entrance. It was large, powerfully built, with the head of a wolf and the body of a man, covered in thick, silvery fur. Its eyes glowed with a soft, golden light, similar to Reese's, but different, older, wiser. It was a creature of myth, a being spoken of in hushed whispers in the ancient texts, a protector of sacred places, a guardian of the balance between worlds. The guardian stopped a short distance from them, its gaze fixed on Aloan, its eyes studying her intently. It spoke, its voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "Daughter of the first moon," it said, its voice neither hostile nor welcoming, but simply observant. "You have awakened a great power." Aloan, still feeling the lingering effects of the moonbloom's magic, stood her ground, her fear battling with a growing sense of awe. She felt a connection to the guardian, a kinship, a shared understanding of the ancient magic that flowed through them. I had to," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We were attacked." The guardian nodded slowly, its gaze shifting to Reese, acknowledging his presence, his role as protector. "The hunters," it said, its voice laced with a hint of disdain. "They seek to disrupt the balance to claim the power for themselves." It turned its attention back to Aloan. "The moon bloom," it said, its voice now carrying a note of warning. "It is a powerful tool, but a dangerous one. It can amplify your abilities, but it can also corrupt you. The darkness, it is always there, waiting to consume." Aloan felt a chill run down her spine, remembering the elder's words, the whispers of a darker side to the first moon's power. She knew the guardian spoke the truth. She had felt the darkness, the seductive pull, the temptation to lose herself in the raw, untamed energy. I will be careful," she said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "I will not let it consume me." The guardian studied her for a long moment, its golden eyes searching hers, assessing her strength, her resolve, her worthiness. Then, it nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with what it saw. "This place," it said, gesturing around the cave with a massive, fur-covered hand, "is a sanctuary. It has been protected for centuries by my kind. It is a place of healing, of learning, of preparation." It offered them refuge, a chance to rest, to recover, to hone their skills, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the Elder. Reese and Aloan gratefully accepted the Guardian's offer. They spent several days within the sanctuary, learning from the ancient being, delving deeper into the mysteries of the first moon, exploring the full extent of Aloan's powers. The Guardian taught Aloan how to control the moonbloom's magic, how to channel it safely, how to resist the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. It showed her how to connect with the earth on a deeper level, how to draw strength from the ancient stones of the mountain, how to harness the power of the natural world. Reese, too, benefited from the Guardian's wisdom, learning about his own heritage, his own connection to the ancient pact between the werewolves and the daughters of the first moon. But their sanctuary, like the cottage before it, was not destined to last. The Elder, driven by his insatiable hunger for power, had not given up his pursuit. He had used his dark magic to track Aloan, to follow the trail of the moonbloom's energy, to find their hidden refuge. One evening, as Aloan and Reese were practicing their abilities within the cave, they felt a sudden shift in the energy, a dark, oppressive presence that sent a wave of fear washing over them. The Guardian, sensing the intrusion, roared in anger, its body tensing, its eyes blazing with a golden fire. "He is here," it said, its voice filled with a mixture of dread and determination. "The Elder, he has found us." The entrance to the cave exploded inward, showering them with debris and dust. The Elder stood there, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, his eyes burning with a cold, dark fire, his presence radiating an aura of malevolence that seemed to suck the very air out of the cave. He was not alone. He was accompanied by a legion of hunters, their numbers far greater than anything Aloan and Reese had faced before. And they were armed not only with conventional weapons, but also with dark magic, imbued with the Elder's power. The sanctuary, once a place of peace and learning, had become a battleground. And the fight for their survival, for the balance of the world, had begun anew. A chilling, distorted echo of the Guardian's earlier growl reverberated from the Elder, a mockery of the ancient being's power. Chapter 15. The Price of Protection. The cave, once a haven of tranquility, erupted into chaos. The Elder, his eyes blazing with a malevolent glee, unleashed his legion of hunters, their dark magic amplifying their ferocity. Reese, drawing his silver knife, and the Guardian, its massive form radiating power, stood ready to defend Eloan and the sanctuary. Eloan, feeling the familiar surge of power coursing through her veins, drew strength from the earth, from the ancient stones of the mountain, from the lingering essence of the moon bloom. She knew this was a battle they might not win. The Elder's power was immense, his hunters numerous, and empowered by his dark magic. The fight was brutal and relentless. The hunters attacked with a savage fury, their weapons imbued with a dark energy that burned and corroded. Reese fought with the agility and ferocity of a cornered wolf, his silver knife a blur of deadly motion, protecting Eloan at every turn. The Guardian, a force of nature, smashed through the hunter's ranks, its claws and teeth tearing through flesh and bone. Eloan, using her connection to the earth, created shields of stone and vines, deflecting attacks and hindering the hunter's movements. She channeled the power of the first moon, healing Reese and the Guardian, bolstering their strength, pushing back against the Elder's dark magic. But the Elder remained aloof, watching the battle unfold with a cold, detached amusement. He was toying with them, testing their strength, their resolve, their limits. He raised his hand, and a wave of dark energy washed over the cave, extinguishing the torches, plunging them into near total darkness. The hunters, empowered by the darkness, pressed their attack, their movements becoming more erratic, more unpredictable. Reese was wounded, a deep gash on his leg, his movements slowing. The Guardian, its silvery fur matted with blood, was tiring, its roars becoming weaker, less frequent. Eloan, feeling the darkness closing in, knew she had to act quickly. She focused her will, drawing on every ounce of her power, channeling the energy of the first moon into a single, desperate attack. She raised her hand, the silver ring on her finger blazing with a blinding light. A wave of pure energy erupted from her, a force of nature that slammed into the hunters, throwing them back against the cave walls, momentarily stunning them. But the Elder merely laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the darkness. "Impressive," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But futile." He unleashed his own attack, a bolt of dark energy that shot towards Eloan, faster than anything she had ever seen. The Guardian, seeing the danger, roared in defiance and leaped in front of Eloan, shielding her with its massive body. The energy struck the Guardian, sending it crashing to the ground, its body convulsing. Eloan screamed, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She rushed to the Guardian's side, her hands hovering over its body, desperate to heal it, to save it. But the Guardian, its golden eyes fading, looked at her, its gaze filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "Protect the balance," it whispered, its voice weak and fading. "It is your destiny." With a final, shuddering breath, the Guardian's light extinguished, its body going still. Eloan felt a wave of grief wash over her, a profound sense of loss that threatened to consume her. She had lost a mentor, a protector, a friend. The Elder, sensing her vulnerability, pressed his attack. He advanced towards her, his hand raised, his eyes burning with a triumphant glee. "Now," he said, his voice a venomous whisper, "you will surrender. You will give me the power of the first moon." Eloan, fueled by grief and rage, stood her ground. She looked at the Elder, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Never," she said, her voice trembling but filled with a newfound determination. She knew she couldn't defeat him, not in her current state. But she could buy time, time for Reese to escape, time for him to survive. She focused her will, drawing on the last vestiges of her power, channeling the energy of the first moon into a final, desperate act. She created a barrier, a wall of pure energy that separated her from the Elder and the remaining hunters, a shield that would hold them back, if only for a few moments. "Reese!" she cried out, her voice echoing through the cave. "Run! Get out of here!" Reese, wounded and exhausted, looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of horror and understanding. He knew what she was doing, what she was sacrificing.
No,
He protested, his voice hoarse. "I won't leave you. You have to." Eloan pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "You have to live for both of us. You have to carry on the fight." He hesitated, his heart torn between his love for her and his duty to survive. But he knew she was right. He couldn't save her, not now. With a final, anguished look, he turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness of the cave, leaving Eloan alone to face the Elder. The price of protection, of love, had been paid. The mournful howl of a wolf, distant and filled with a profound sadness, echoed through the mountains, a lament for the fallen, a promise of vengeance. Chapter 16. Scars of the Soul. Reese ran, his heart pounding in his chest, his lungs burning, his legs screaming in pain. He ran not out of cowardice, but out of obedience, out of love, out of a desperate hope that somehow Eloan would survive. He ran with the image of her standing defiant against the Elder, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness, burned into his mind. He stumbled through the labyrinthine tunnels of the cave, his senses on high alert, listening for any sign of pursuit. The hunters, momentarily stunned by Eloan's sacrifice, would soon regain their composure and come after him. He had to escape, to reach safety, to find a way to save her. He emerged from the cave into the cool night air, the moon a silent witness to his grief and his desperation. He looked back at the mountain, at the sanctuary that had become a tomb, his heart aching with a pain that went deeper than any physical wound. He knew he couldn't stay there. He had to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the Elder. He had to find help, to find allies, to find a way to fight back. He followed a hidden path, a trail known only to his pack, a path that led down the mountain, towards the whispering woods, towards home. He moved with the speed and agility of a wounded wolf, driven by a primal need to survive, to honor Eloan's sacrifice, to avenge her and the Guardian's deaths. The journey was agonizing, both physically and emotionally. His leg throbbed with pain, his wounds bleeding, his body exhausted. But it was the pain in his heart, the ache of loss, the crushing weight of guilt, that threatened to overwhelm him. He replayed the events of the night in his mind, over and over again, each replay a fresh stab of agony. He saw Eloan's face, her courage, her determination, her love. He saw the Guardian falling, sacrificing itself to protect her. He saw the Elder's triumphant sneer, his dark magic, his insatiable hunger for power. He blamed himself. He should have been stronger, faster, more prepared. He should have been able to protect her, to save her. He had failed her. He reached the edge of the whispering woods, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth filling his senses. He paused, looking back at the mountain, a silent vow forming in his heart. "I will not let your sacrifice be in vain." Eloan, he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I will find you. I will save you. I will avenge you. I swear it on my life, on my soul." He entered the woods, disappearing into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness, a lone wolf on a desperate mission. He sought refuge in a hidden den, a place known only to his closest kin, a place where he could lick his wounds, both physical and emotional, and planned his next move. He collapsed on the cold earth, his body trembling with exhaustion and grief. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the pain, the images, the memories. But they were relentless, haunting him, driving him to the brink of despair. He saw Eloan's face, her smile, her eyes, her touch. He felt her warmth, her presence, her love. And he knew that he would do anything, risk anything, sacrifice anything, to get her back. As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, casting a pale light over the whispering woods, Reese, wounded and alone, began to heal, his body slowly mending, his spirit scarred but not broken. The scars on his body were a testament to the battles he had fought, the wounds he had endured. But the scars on his soul, the invisible wounds of loss and grief, were far deeper, far more painful. And they would fuel his vengeance. The mournful howls had ceased, replaced by a determined, almost silent resolve. Chapter 17. The Unraveling of Secrets. Days turned into weeks, and Rhys remained hidden, a solitary wolf nursing his wounds and plotting his revenge. He used the time to heal, to regain his strength, to hone his skills. He practiced his tracking, his fighting, his control over his werewolf nature. He pushed himself to his limits, driven by a burning need to be ready, to be strong enough to face the Elder and rescue Aloan. He also delved deeper into the ancient texts, the ones they had salvaged from the cottage and the sanctuary, searching for any clue, any information that might help him in his quest. He reread the passages about the daughters of the first moon, about their powers, their responsibilities, their vulnerabilities. He focused on the sections about the moon bloom, the forbidden ritual, the potential for corruption. He realized that Aloan, in her desperate attempt to save them, had unwittingly opened herself up to the Elder's influence, making her more susceptible to his dark magic. He discovered a hidden passage, a cryptic prophecy that spoke of a way to sever the connection between the daughter of the first moon and the Elder, a way to break the hold of the dark magic, a way to restore the balance. The prophecy spoke of a place, a sacred site, located deep within the heart of the Whispering Woods, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, a place where the power of the first moon was strongest. It spoke of a ritual, a counter-ritual to the one the Elder was undoubtedly performing, a ritual that required a sacrifice, but not of life, but of connection. Rhys knew what he had to do. He had to find the sacred site, he had to perform the ritual, he had to sever his bond with Aloan, at least temporarily, to break the Elder's hold on her. It was a desperate gamble, a risky maneuver that could cost him everything. It meant severing the connection that had brought them together, the bond that was the source of their strength, their love, their destiny. But it was the only way, the only chance he had to save her. He prepared himself, both physically and spiritually. He gathered the necessary materials, the herbs, the stones, the symbols described in the prophecy. He fasted, he meditated, he focused his will, preparing himself for the ordeal ahead. He knew that the ritual would be painful, both for him and for Aloan. It would be a test of their strength, their resolve, their love. But he was willing to risk it all, to sacrifice everything, to save her. He set out on his journey, heading deeper into the Whispering Woods, towards the sacred site, his heart heavy with a mixture of hope and dread. He moved with the stealth and agility of a wolf, avoiding the hunter's patrols, his senses on high alert, his determination unwavering. He found the sacred site, a clearing bathed in moonlight, a circle of ancient stones surrounding a natural spring, its waters shimmering with an ethereal glow. It was a place of power, a place of magic, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. He began the ritual, chanting the ancient words, arranging the stones, placing the herbs, drawing the symbols. He felt the power of the first moon coursing through him, a torrent of energy that both invigorated and terrified him. As he reached the climax of the ritual, he felt a searing pain, a tearing sensation in his heart, as if his very soul was being ripped apart. He cried out in agony, his body convulsing, his golden eyes blazing with a blinding light. He felt the bond with Aloan weaken, fray, then snap. He felt a profound sense of loss, a gaping emptiness where her presence had once been, a silence where her voice had once echoed. He collapsed to the ground, exhausted, heartbroken, but free. He had severed the connection, broken the Elder's hold, given Aloan a chance to fight back, a chance to survive. But he had also lost her, perhaps forever. He had sacrificed their bond, their love, their destiny. He looked up at the moon, a silent question in his eyes, a desperate hope that he had made the right choice. The answer was, for now, only silence, broken only by the rustling leaves and the whispering wind. Chapter 18. A choice between worlds. Eloan awoke to darkness. Not the comforting darkness of the night, but a suffocating, oppressive darkness that pressed in on her, stealing her breath, chilling her soul. She was bound, her wrists and ankles secured by chains that felt strangely cold, devoid of any natural metal. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of mildew, of something else, something foul and ancient. She tried to move, to struggle, but her muscles were weak, her body drained. She felt empty, hollow, as if a vital part of her had been ripped away. She remembered the battle in the cave, the guardian's sacrifice, Rhys's desperate escape, and her own decision to face the Elder alone. She remembered the searing pain, the feeling of her bond with Rhys severing. She felt a pang of loss, a profound sense of loneliness, a gaping emptiness where his presence had once been. He did it, she whispered, her voice hoarse, her heart aching. He had performed the ritual, severed the connection, freed her from the Elder's immediate control, but at what cost? She was a prisoner, trapped in the Elder's lair, a dark, subterranean chamber deep beneath the ruins of an old cathedral, a place steeped in centuries of dark magic. She could feel the Elder's presence, a constant, nagging pressure at the edge of her awareness, a malevolent force that sought to dominate her, to control her, to consume her. He appeared before her, his form silhouetted against the flickering light of a single torch, his eyes burning with a cold, dark fire. He was even more terrifying than she remembered, his presence radiating an aura of power and cruelty that made her skin crawl. "You are awake," he said, his voice a rasping whisper that seemed to echo through the chamber.
Good.
"It is time for you to fulfill your destiny." Eloan glared at him, her eyes filled with defiance, despite her fear, despite her weakness. "I will never serve you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The Elder laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You have no choice," he said. "The bond is broken. You are vulnerable. You are mine." He raised his hand, and a wave of dark energy washed over Eloan, a suffocating force that threatened to crush her, to break her will. She resisted, drawing on the remnants of her power, on her connection to the earth, on the memory of Rhys, on the hope that he was still out there, fighting for her. But the Elder was too strong. His magic was ancient, powerful, and utterly ruthless. He began to probe her mind, seeking to control her thoughts, her emotions, her will. Eloan fought back, erecting mental barriers, shielding her mind, clinging to her sense of self, to her love for Rhys, to her determination to resist. The Elder, frustrated by her resistance, increased the pressure, his dark magic assaulting her mind, tearing at her defenses, seeking to break her. "You cannot resist me," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You are nothing without the first moon's power, and that power is now mine to command." He showed her visions, twisted images of a world consumed by darkness, a world where the balance between the human and supernatural realms had been shattered, a world where the Elder reigned supreme. He showed her Rhys, alone and hunted, his spirit broken, his hope extinguished. He showed her the Whispering Woods, ravaged and defiled, its ancient magic corrupted, its creatures enslaved. Eloan cried out in anguish, her heart breaking at the sight of the devastation, at the thought of Rhys suffering, at the prospect of a world ruled by darkness. The Elder smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. "This is your future," he said. "Unless you choose to embrace your destiny. Unless you choose to join me." He offered her a choice between worlds. A choice between surrendering to his power, becoming his tool, his queen, and ruling alongside him in a world of darkness, or resisting, fighting, and facing certain death, leaving Rhys alone, leaving the world vulnerable to the Elder's tyranny. It was a choice that would determine not only her fate, but the fate of everyone she loved, the fate of the entire world. The chains binding her felt colder, almost alive, as if reflecting the weight of her decision. The silence following his offer was punctuated only by the distant drip of water, each drop a measured countdown to her answer. Chapter 19. The Ritual of Binding. The elder's offer hung in the air, a suffocating weight pressing down on Aloan. The choice he presented was a cruel paradox: surrender and become a monster, or resist and condemn everything she loved to destruction. The visions he had shown her, of Reese broken and the whispering woods ravaged, tore at her heart, fueling her despair. Yet, even in the depths of her captivity, surrounded by darkness and facing seemingly insurmountable odds, a flicker of defiance remained. It was a spark ignited by her love for Reese, by her connection to the earth, by the memory of the guardian's sacrifice, by the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the silver ring on her finger, now devoid of its usual warmth, yet still present. "I will not," Aloan gasped, her voice weak but resolute, her eyes fixed on the elder's burning gaze. "I will never join you." The elder's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "Then you choose oblivion," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You choose to condemn yourself and your precious wolf to eternal suffering." He raised his hand, and the dark energy that permeated the chamber intensified, swirling around Aloan, constricting her, suffocating her. He began to chant, his voice a guttural drone that seemed to vibrate the very stones of the chamber, the words ancient and powerful, a language of darkness and domination. It was the ritual of binding, Aloan realized, the ritual he had intended to perform all along, the ritual that would strip her of her free will, turning her into his puppet, his weapon, his queen in a world of shadows. She fought back, drawing on every ounce of her remaining strength, on her connection to the earth, on the memory of Reese's love, on the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the ring. She whispered words of protection, ancient words that she didn't understand, words that came from a place deep within her, a place of instinct, of heritage, of hope. But the elder's power was overwhelming. His dark magic was ancient, relentless, and fueled by centuries of hatred and ambition. He was slowly, inexorably, breaking her down, eroding her defenses, crushing her will. She felt her consciousness slipping, her mind fragmenting, her sense of self dissolving. She saw visions, twisted images of the future he offered, a future of power and darkness, a future where she was his queen, ruling alongside him, a puppet dancing to his tune. She saw Reese, his golden eyes filled with despair, his spirit broken, his hope extinguished. She saw the whispering woods, ravaged and defiled, its ancient magic corrupted, its creatures enslaved. She cried out in anguish, a silent scream that echoed through the chamber, a cry of despair, of loss, of surrender.
No.
Even in the face of oblivion, a spark of defiance remained. A tiny, flickering flame of hope, fueled by the memory of Reese's love, by the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the ring. She focused on that hum, on that tiny spark, on that last vestige of her connection to the first moon, to the earth, to herself. She whispered a single word, a word of power, a word of defiance, a word of love. Reese, the word, spoken with the last of her strength, seemed to hang in the air, a tiny spark of light in the overwhelming darkness. It was a beacon, a call, a prayer. And then something shifted. The elder's chanting faltered, his concentration broken, his power disrupted. The dark energy that surrounded Aloan flickered, weakened, then dissipated. The elder staggered back, his eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Impossible," he gasped, his voice a strangled whisper. "The bond it is broken. You have no power." But Aloan felt it, a faint but growing warmth spreading through her veins, revitalizing her, strengthening her. The silver ring on her finger began to hum, a subtle vibration that grew in intensity, filling the chamber with a soft, golden light. The bond, it was not completely broken. Reese had severed the connection, yes, but he had not destroyed it. It was still there, weakened, frayed, but present. And her love for him, her connection to him, was a bridge, a conduit, a source of power. The ritual had weakened the elder's hold, while simultaneously strengthening the residual connection. The ring was the key. The elder, Realizing his mistake, his moment of triumph turning into a desperate struggle, renewed his attack, his dark magic lashing out, seeking to crush her, to bind her, to consume her. But it was too late. The tide had turned. Alone, fueled by the rekindled bond, by the power of the first moon, by the love that connected her to Reese, rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with a golden light, a light that banished the darkness, a light that heralded the dawn. A single, clear note, like the chime of a distant bell, resonated through the chamber, a sound of hope, of defiance, of reunion. Chapter 20. The Final Confrontation of Hearts. The golden light emanating from Aloan grew, filling the chamber, pushing back the oppressive darkness that had held her captive. The elder, his face a mask of rage and disbelief, staggered back, his dark magic faltering, his power waning against the resurgent force of the first moon. Aloan stood tall, her body trembling with the unleashed power, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. She felt Reese's presence, faint but growing stronger, a beacon of hope in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of their bond, a bond that even he had not been able to fully sever. It had not been a severing, she now understood, but a redirection. "You cannot defeat me," the elder hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, his body shaking with the effort to maintain his control. "I am ancient, I am powerful, you are a relic," Aloan retorted, her voice resonating with the power of generations of daughters of the first moon, a voice amplified by the silver ring, now blazing with a blinding light. "Your time is over." She raised her hand, and the energy of the first moon coalesced, forming a sphere of pure, golden light, a force of nature that pulsed with life, with power, with love. The elder, realizing he was losing, unleashed his final, desperate attack. He summoned all his remaining dark magic, channeling it into a single, devastating blast, aimed at Aloan's heart. The two forces collided, a clash of light and darkness, a battle for the fate of the world, a confrontation of hearts. The chamber shook, the very foundations of the cathedral trembling under the immense power unleashed. Aloan, drawing strength from her connection to the earth, from the memory of the guardian, from the love that bound her to Reese, stood firm, her will unwavering, her spirit unbroken. She poured all her being, all her power, all her love, into the golden light, pushing back against the elder's darkness, holding her ground, refusing to yield. Slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. The golden light, fueled by Aloan's love and determination, began to overwhelm the elder's dark magic, pushing it back, consuming it, erasing it. The elder screamed, a sound of pure agony and despair, his body dissolving, his form disintegrating, his ancient power extinguished. The darkness vanished, replaced by the soft, golden glow of the first moon, filling the chamber with a sense of peace, of hope, of renewal. Aloan stood there, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the power that had surged through her receding, leaving her weak and drained, but also victorious. She had done it. She had defeated the elder, broken his hold, saved herself, saved Reese, saved the world. She looked around the chamber, at the remnants of the battle, at the dust and debris, at the emptiness. She was alone, but not for long. She heard a sound, a familiar sound, a sound that sent a wave of relief and joy washing over her. It was the sound of running footsteps, the sound of a heartbeat, the sound of Reese. He burst into the chamber, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of fear, relief, and love. He saw her, standing there, bathed in the golden light, her body trembling, her face streaked with tears, but alive. "Aloan!" He cried out, his voice hoarse with emotion. He rushed to her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight, his body shaking with the force of his emotions. "You're alive," he whispered, his voice choked with tears. You're alive." Aloan clung to him, her body melting into his, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "Reese," she whispered, her voice trembling. You came. I felt you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I felt the bond rekindle. I felt you. They held each other, their bodies trembling, their hearts beating in unison, their souls reunited. The bond, weakened but not broken, was now stronger than ever, forged anew in the crucible of their struggle, a testament to the enduring power of their love. They had faced the darkness, they had endured the pain, they had overcome the odds. They had won. As they stood there, in the heart of the ruined cathedral, bathed in the soft, golden light of the first moon, a new chapter in their intertwined destinies began. A chapter of healing, of rebuilding, of love. The silver ring on Aloan's finger, now glowing with a steady, gentle light, was a symbol of their victory, their bond, their future. The silence, finally, was one of peace. Epilogue. The years that followed were a testament to the resilience of the human and werewolf spirit. Briarwood, once shrouded in secrecy and fear, slowly began to heal, the scars of the elders' reign fading with each passing season. The Whispering Woods, cleansed of the dark magic that had tainted it, flourished anew, its ancient power restored, its creatures thriving. Aloan and Rhys, their bond stronger than ever, became the protectors of the balance, the guardians of the peace between the human and supernatural worlds. They rebuilt the Graves estate, turning it into a sanctuary, a place of refuge for those who sought knowledge, healing, and understanding. Aloan, embracing her heritage as the daughter of the first moon, honed her abilities, mastering her connection to the earth, her power to heal, to protect, to transform. She became a wise woman, a leader, a beacon of hope for her community, both human and werewolf. Rhys, his scars a reminder of the battles they had fought, stood by her side, his unwavering loyalty and love a constant source of strength. He remained her protector, her confidant, her soulmate. He led his pack, now expanded and strengthened, with wisdom and compassion, ensuring the safety and well-being of his people. They never forgot the sacrifices that had been made, the guardians' selfless act, the pain of their temporary separation, the constant threat of the darkness that still lurked in the shadows. They honored the memory of those they had lost, keeping their spirits alive in their hearts and in their actions. They also worked to educate others, to dispel the fear and prejudice that had fueled the hunters' hatred for so long. They shared their knowledge, their experiences, their truth, fostering understanding and cooperation between the human and supernatural communities. They often returned to the sacred site in the mountains, the cave where the guardian had fallen, a place of remembrance, of reflection, of renewal. They would stand there, hand in hand, gazing at the moonlit sky, feeling the ancient power of the earth beneath their feet, their hearts filled with gratitude and love. One evening, many years later, as they sat by the fire in the library of the Graves estate, surrounded by books, by the scent of old wood and lavender, by the comforting presence of each other, Aloan looked at Rhys, her eyes filled with a love that had only deepened with time. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, her voice soft, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, the scars that told a story of courage, of sacrifice, of love. Rhys smiled, a genuine smile that reached his golden eyes, a smile that spoke of a life well lived, a love well earned, a destiny fulfilled. "Never," he said, his voice husky with emotion. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, the silver ring on her finger warm against his skin. "I would choose you again, and again in every lifetime, under every moon." Aloan leaned in and kissed him, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of a love that had endured the test of time, a love that had conquered darkness, a love that was eternal. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, the scent of pine and old books mingling with the sweet aroma of their shared breath. And as the moon, full and bright, shone down upon Briarwood, upon the Whispering Woods, upon the Graves estate, upon Aloan and Rhys, a sense of peace, of contentment, of completion settled over them. Their journey had been long, arduous, and filled with danger. But it had also been a journey of discovery, of transformation, of love. And it had been worth it. Every single moment. The silver ring pulsed gently. It was, and would always be, a symbol of their enduring bond. The end.